So as people are joining, we see that some people are joining. I'll just talk to you a little bit about Sales Globe. I think most of you know, but we are a problem solving firm, a data driven, creative problem solving firm for sales. And that means to solve the biggest challenges that organizations have with sales. And that would lead us to why we have these roundtables and really why we're talking about sales performance management today.
So, as we look at all these indicators of changes, right, and what we've been saying, Michelle, for a long time is we don't know what the answer is, but we certainly know what a lot of the indicators are. We've been talking about the idea of fear and financials being drivers of how we're going to and how we're working as sales organizations. And from that, we started to come up with 25 predictions for what we think is going to be happening in 2021 around sales organizations. And we're going to be focusing in on number 23 today, which is about technology investment and the
That's
fact
right.
that that's increase. And we're going to get particularly to SPM, sales performance management. And one of the things we've been hearing a lot, the conversations we've been having with companies, Michelle, and in the research, is that this is becoming not just a calculation tool, but it's a critical communication tool. So since we're not all together in offices anymore and sitting in person anymore, people are getting information and they're communicating through CRM and through AM more and more frequently. And did a survey a few months back that had about 300 companies in it, and they said that the importance of communicating through those technologies is becoming even so. So we're going to be today about SPM, which I think is really exciting because this, even though it's been around a few years, it's an emerging and growing area, which I think is going to be really beneficial to organizations.
That's exactly right, Mark. So we part of that survey, why one of our predictions, we've been talking to companies across the globe about this in 20, but also, there are things like, oh gosh, there was a Fortune survey that came out, and over 80% of the Fortune 500 CEOs said that technology transformations are becoming the priority as they look into 2021. And we believe a lot of that has to do with providing visibility
Mm-hmm.
and making, visibility to the front line for salespeople as well as management. So, with that, I would love to use our, some of you may know Rob Blohm. He is a good friend of ours and colleague in the space. He's got well 20 years of experience in sales performance management, and he's currently the CRO of Open Symmetry. Rob, welcome today to our roundtable, and thank you so much for sharing your to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here, Michelle. Thanks, Mark. Can you hear me okay? Just want to make sure.
We can hear you great. Yep.
All
You
right,
look
good.
good. You look a little green screen, by the way, but
No, just
So, Rob, why don't you tell everybody just a little bit about yourself, Open Symmetry as a company, and then you and in your role.
yeah, no, happy to. So I've actually been in this space a little over 20 years now. I started with a company I think everybody's familiar with, the Alexander Group. I was part of their first launch of a technology implementation team. And so, believe it or not, these last 20 years, I've been focused on helping companies automate their sales compensation solutions. Started as a project manager, wore a lot of different consulting hats, and currently oversee our sales, marketing, and alliances efforts here at Open Symmetry as one of the senior partners. If you, I guess, for the background on Open Symmetry, if you're not familiar with the organization, we've been in place, I don't know, a little over 15 years, and we focus almost exclusively on helping clients select and implement automated automation solutions for sales compensation or sales performance management. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just sort of everything you could think of that it comes to taking sales compensation plans and putting them in one of these solutions, and then helping the client understand how to get the most out of that application. So, yeah, I guess that's
So,
the Reader's Digest.
all right, that's great. Now, without putting you on the spot, but you're familiar with my personality. I'm kind of going. I would love for you to share with people just something about yourself, Rob, that maybe they wouldn't know about. Just a fun fact.
Okay. Yeah, I guess one random fact about me is I actually got into boxing 5 years ago. I'm 50 years old. So I actually
Oh,
got into
cool.
boxing at 45, which is sort of odd given, much slower, much more out of shape. It's been a blast. And believe it or not, I've had a couple of amateur fights. So it's been kind of a kick. So there you go. It's just total random.
No pun intended with the kick thing. So let me
No
ask you
kickboxing,
something.
no.
Did you win?
Yeah, yeah, I
You
won
didn't
both
win?
both
Did
both
you win?
fights.
You won both.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we go to Chicago at Spotlight, I want to mean we're walking down the street at
Yeah,
night. Yeah.
any amateur fights break out, I need to make
Yeah.
sure we're on our side.
Sanctioned amateur fights. Yeah, that'd be good.
I did make sure I talked about you being a colleague and a friend, right? Just anyway.
Yeah.
So anyway, great. Now let's just talk a little bit about you were discussing this. I think it's really interesting that the evolution of sales performance management. So without getting into all of the nitty gritty, detail, just like a high level snapshot of like the evolution of it. And then I'd love to come up with, why you've heard our position as to why we believe that companies are going to be really focusing on it as they get into 2021. Just kind of what your perspective is around that as well.
Yeah, it's definitely evolved, right, over the last 20 odd years, from let's create a calculator that can automate your sales compensation design to now we have so much more of a broader conversation around SPM, right? I mean, it went from those early days of, hey, we just want to automate and give you a comp statement and maybe build some data integration to get all this stuff connected. Now it's, hey, how do we do territory and quota planning? How do we bring that into the solution? How do we use benchmarks? There's a lot of conversation about predictive analytics and using artificial intelligence, machine learning. I mean, all these buzzwords are getting pulled into the SPM conversation. And I would probably offer that it's good, right? I mean, it's good to see the space evolve, right? It's starting to take on more of a mature feeling, a more of a mature vibe. But I think at its core, clients are still very, very interested in making sure that they can get these comp plans into this system and get good reports out of it. And I think, without, just understanding what it takes to get that done, all that other stuff is vaporware until you get the kind of the core capabilities locked in. And I would probably see, we still see implementations get launched without covering some of the basics. And so I think, and we'll get into it a little bit in the survey data, but I mean, it is representative that a lot of people aren't totally satisfied with all that other stuff, but they're still focused on the core thing. So I don't know, it's a bit of a back and forth with myself and some of the other executives at the vendors as to what, clients are ultimately needing and wanting. There's two differences, right, between want and need.
Yes. Yep.
But anyway, so I could probably prattle on a while on that, but yeah, I would say that, yeah, it's evolving, but there's still a huge emphasis in just getting the table stakes correct.
Okay, so we'll jump right into that. You reminded me of a story, so I'm going to draw a parallel story. We're doing consulting with one larger communications platforms, just like Zoom, right? So they had telephone communications, they had meeting room communication, the collaboration software space, and they were constantly bringing out new features and functions. But their core function, which was really just the audio piece, not even the video, it had so many problems. You remember that, Mark? So we would be on calls with like global leaders, and all of a sudden, we'd be talking, and all of a sudden you would hear, right? You'd hear all this noise and interruptions, and President would call up IT. Let's find out what's going on, right? But they were so focused on bringing out new things to get, they weren't really focused on making sure that their core product performed exactly as their clients really wanted it to be. So
Right.
great point that you're making there.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. I've got a great
So
example. I was just going to say one of the top vendors is
yeah.
absolutely shooting for the moon. And I talked to one of their clients the other day, and they had an outage for 4 days. This is a cloud-based
Wow.
solution, right? And it's like,
Yeah,
what are we doing?
that's crazy. So where do you focus, right? So make sure that, so something for something I guess that I would believe that you're thinking about as you look at implementation, doing the assessment work, is who's really focused on that core. So I guess with that, Rob, I kind of turn this over to you a little
Sure.
bit, going to talk to us about some of the findings you have around some of the big players that are out there today.
Yeah, no, happy to. So why don't you tell me if you can see the screen? Is it coming across?
Mhm.
Looks
Yep.
great. Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So I think for today's conversation, the hope was to maybe share, if you will, some survey content, right? We did a survey with Sales Management Association last year, where we asked a lot of clients what they thought of their vendors, right? So we focus on a handful of vendors, and the idea I think for today is to bring that information forward, drive a little bit of conversation, right, around what are table stakes, what are the things they're doing well, what are the things they're not doing well, and then as the conversation evolves, I can actually share with you pricing, some of the pricing from some of the vendor selections we've helped clients run, and things like that. But I hopefully, we'll get some provocative content on the screen, and you guys can ask questions, and hopefully there's some questions come in. But anyway, that's the
That's
idea
great.
for, yeah, that's the idea. So why don't I just frame this out real quickly? So the survey was done last year, as I said. Sales Management Association
Mhm.
ran it, and we focused on the practitioners, right? Asking people who manage sales compensation today what they think of their vendor, and so the idea was, hey, you made this purchase, what do you think of this vendor as it relates to maybe these 20 different things? And what we ended up doing is focusing on, let me see if I can get the slide to populate, these 5 vendors. So, and I would offer that obviously there's more vendors. I think there's probably 15 different SPM vendors out there in the market, but we had a little bit of a smaller sample size. And so we really just focused on these 5 where we thought we had some statistically relevant data, or at least content that would be interesting to look at, right? It's not hundreds of participants, but we still thought it was of interest. So even though there's a
Yeah, I
ton of,
think that's statistically relevant. Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah, no, no.
Go ahead.
Even though there's tons of vendors, this is the 5 we're gonna talk about. So, with that said, I don't know if everybody's familiar with the 5 that I put on the screen. So I thought, Michelle, Mark, we could take a minute just to walk through these 5 specifically, and then I can pause. And if you guys have questions, or if questions come in, we can definitely maybe answer them. But the idea was to
Great.
focus on the 5 I put up, and just starting off with Oracle. So Oracle's been around for a long time. I mean, absolutely had a commissions application in place. And over the years, it has evolved, and it's actually gotten really good. I mean, we typically only see it deployed when you're implementing Oracle CX or Oracle Financials, but through vendor selections and getting and having a practice on this application, I would argue it's a decent solution on its own right. The next application that we got survey content on was Optimize. Now, Optimize has been around for a long time as well. A lot of people may know them as Synergy back in the day. It's run by a CEO, gentleman named Mark Stifler. And I'll be honest, in the last 18 months, we've seen a lot of weird stuff come out of client conversations that are on the Optimize platform. We've heard rumors that they're leaving the space. They're only going to work on sales operations. And we've seen a lot of challenges between the clients and Optimize as a company. So we did gather data on it, but I would offer that I'm not sure where that application is going to be in the future. Another application that we wanted to or that we collected data on is SAP. Now, SAP, if everybody's familiar, used to be Callidus, right? So SAP bought Callidus a year and a half or 2 years ago. And it's a great application. It has always been in the Magic Quadrant on the far right. I think it actually led the pack for a number of years. So they've got a great tool, right? And it's got a lot of capabilities. It's more of a set architecture. So not that you can't do anything you want, but it has a defined architecture that you would operate in. And then my screen cuts it off, but they recently inside SAP transitioned the SAP commissions out of CX and into their success factor group. So their HR technology stack. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, given most of the time sales compensation is owned by finance or operations or sales ops. So we'll see how that sort of plays out for them.
Okay. Yep.
The next one is Vericent. So Vericent came out on the market a long time ago out of Toronto. They got bought by IBM, and then they came back onto their own feet at the beginning of 2020. It's a great tool. It's considered a very flexible and a highly adaptable application, right? And so that's great in some respects, but it can also get clients in a little bit of trouble. And I say that because it is flexible. You can, for the most part, hang yourself if you don't know what you're doing. So my guidance, anybody going through an implementation on Vericent, is pay attention to best practices, understand what you're building and build for the future so that it can adapt with you. That would be probably the only thing I'd offer on Vericent, but they are doing a great job coming back into the market. And Mark Altshuler, I think, is got a lot of momentum at their company to get that product going. The last solution that we gather data on is Exactly. Now, I would offer that Exactly really made their mark 15, 16 years ago, coming out and being the first cloud-based solution, right? So they took a page out of SFDC's book and they said, we're going to only be cloud, and that's going to be our platform. And it's great because it really paved the way for the other SPMs to jump on board. But Exactly, because they came out the way they did, they really targeted the commercial or SMB space very heavily, right? So they went out to help companies transition off of Excel and Access and get onto an automated solution. And so I think they sort of drug that reputation with them a bit. And so some of the things that you will hear from clients that go through vendor selections is that they don't have the full robust capability that some of the other applications do, or they might get picked on a little bit for performance because, you may not see Exactly at the big insurance telcos and bankings and banks. So great product though, absolutely wonderful solution. And my argument has always been, hey, if Exactly fits your needs, that you shouldn't have any issue.
So two of these, Rob, are broader systems, and the others are more standalones, right? So Oracle and SAP. You mentioned Oracle. A lot of times it's implemented with the Oracle system. But if you take Oracle and SAP, how often are they implemented as standalone SPM solutions versus part of the bigger suite?
Oracle's almost always part of the suite. We almost never see Oracle show up in a vendor selection when Oracle is not the incumbent ERP system or there's not a big Oracle presence, right?
Okay.
And oftentimes in the past, I think they would give it away. If you bought Oracle Financials, you by default would get Oracle OIC or Oracle Incentive Comp.
Mm-hmm.
With SAP, because they bought Callidus was a standalone solution. Callidus can still be implemented regardless of a client's footprint or connection to SAP.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's obvious leverage points for having a bigger SAP footprint, having access to licenses, having some connectivity and access to different technologies that would support it. But SAP by itself or SAP commissions by itself could easily be implemented for anybody who just needed it, even though they weren't an SAP shop.
Yeah, so we see a bit of a different dynamic within our clients as well, just based on what you're saying, Rob, in that you'll see a pull toward Oracle or SAP from the IT department of the client, which may not be coming out of the sales organization, whereas maybe Vericent Exactly perhaps optimize be a little bit more from the sales organization. And so the question of, does IT really know what the right answer is? Do they really understand what sales needs versus, should it be the decision be driven out of the sales organization?
Yeah, I think there's certain boxes you need to check for the IT department. I mean, the IT department will have comfort levels. They'll be more comfortable if they're an SAP shop buying SAP
Right.
versus Oracle, something like that. But yeah, when we sit down and we're running a vendor selection, all of our time, not all of our time, but 80% of our time is with the business team, right? The people that are managing sales comp day to day, because we need to understand what the processes are, where they need to take their sales compensation in the future. And that's going to drive, if you will, what are the requirements that we're going to need to see filled by the vendors, right? From a workflow standpoint, reporting, analytics, how complex of a comp plan are they going to be able to handle? All that stuff comes out of sitting down and those interviews and those workshops with the sales comp team.
All right. So I have one question, which is we've got 6 companies in the Magic Quadrant and 5 that were part of the survey. So I'd like to just say a word. Let's just say a word here about Anaplan, because it's also another big solution out there, right? So although we don't have all the stats, can you talk to everyone that's on today about what are some of the good use cases for Anaplan out there today?
Yeah, Anaplan, it's regrettable we didn't have enough stats to pull Anaplan into the study. But Anaplan by itself is a little bit different, right? So all the applications you see that are up on the screen are transactional based, so that you process these transactions, and they're designed to do that. Whereas Anaplan is a little bit more akin to Excel. It's a model that you sort of put everything in and you look at it as you go. So I think, for Anaplan, it's hugely adaptable. You can do just about anything with it, similar like you could do with Excel. Where we tend to see Anaplan be very, very strong from an SPM standpoint is when companies already have it embedded and it's being used to do quota planning, territory planning, forecasting, and things like that, right? Because then when you bolt on or build out some sort of SPM or ICM capability, it sort of comes together very easily. On the other side of the coin, if you're looking for something that has a more traditional built to purpose, which is what these other 5 are, they're built to purpose or built for sales performance management. What you do is, what we've seen is people put the two applications together. So they may use Anaplan for forecasting and things like that, or quota and territory planning. And then they will build integration points to take all that information and port it into the SPM application.
Okay,
So
great.
I don't know if
Thanks
that
for that.
helps.
All right, and I failed to mention to everyone, if you've got any questions for Rob or any SPM questions, please put them in the chat. No, in Q&A. Put them in Q&A, please. Thank you. Okay, Rob, you got the floor.
Okay. All right. So let's get into the survey a little bit. So as I mentioned, we want to ask clients what they thought of their vendors. And what we decided to do is pick these 7 categories to say, hey, Mr. Client, you've got this application. How satisfied are you with their capabilities, right? And so when we think about this, we think about calculation logic. So think about the comp plans you're putting into the system. Crediting would be, hey, are we crediting 5 people or are we crediting 150 people? Well, how satisfied are you with the logic that's being provided? Platform integration, that simply goes back to, hey, how robust of a data integration strategy do we have to have with our technology, and how satisfied are we that it's meeting our needs? Mm-hmm. The other ones are workflow. Think about disputes, think about plan design or compensation plan acceptance, forecasting, reporting, analytics kind of go together, but are separated, because a lot of times we'll think of reporting as static reports that go out to the payees and the managers, compensation statements, things like that. Analytics might be more akin to dashboards, right? So managers, executives looking at performance of their team, looking at the performance of the plans, things like that. What we found is that, as you would expect, the top 3, integration, credit, and logic, they're doing a great job. These are table stakes, and you can't pay comp unless you get those right. So obviously you probably see a better satisfaction. Where we are, I guess, troubled in seeing is that analytics and reporting were so low on the satisfaction rating. I mean, especially since these guys, they almost lead with this during the demos, right? They want to get you excited about, hey, these are the bells and whistles that you're going to get through analytics. This is the optics you're going to provide your sales force. And so when we see such a low satisfaction rating, that sort of makes you wonder, right?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, Michelle, did you have a question?
Nope.
Okay. I wanted to throw in, Rob. So when we talked before about some of the differences between foundational core functionality, right? So do the calculations, it's got to work right. You mentioned the one provider that had been down for 4 days. So you've got to have a stable foundation working. It seems like those are the ones that are getting rated more highly at the top, right? And the reporting analytics, it seems like those are things that would be more for communications to the organization, to the sales organization. Is that right?
Yeah. And so I don't know, I'm going to jump in and just populate this out, Mark, but there's a couple of things that I think are driving the lower satisfaction in reporting analytics. One of them is, I'm not sure people are doing a good enough job vetting these systems as it relates to reports and analytics. A lot of these systems will come to you and say, hey, if you don't have a set group of reports or dashboards you want, we'll just give you our out of the box. And our out of the box is great. It's based on best practice and blah, blah, blah. Well, the problem is, if you go with that approach, oftentimes you're going to get what the vendor thinks is best practice, not what you actually think is best practice or aligns with you. So you end up with something that's not going to meet your satisfaction. I'm not saying the vendor couldn't deliver, but it kind of goes back to, if you don't define your future state for business intelligence around SPM, you're probably not going to end somewhere where you're heavily satisfied. But that the second bullet on there does kind of go back to, sometimes these guys just don't have the capabilities. You get a little bit of a snow job when you're going through the vendor selection and they're doing their demos and things like that. And if you don't know the right questions to ask, what happens is you're going to buy something that looks great during the demo, and you're going to find out, wow, they couldn't really connect those dots. Like, I can't bring this data in and do comparative analysis. So a little bit is capabilities. These vendors do vary on their or their functional capabilities, but I think a big part of it is satisfaction, because most of these guys have this stuff down. The capabilities there. It's just, you got to tease it out during the implementation and make sure that people adopt it.
Okay. So capability versus satisfaction and customer experience. So capabilities there, maybe they need to work on making it work for the customer.
Right. I think the capabilities for most of these vendors are there. I think the satisfaction ratings would be higher if they had a better implementation, or they did a better job defining their requirements and defining where they want to land.
Okay. So it's not that your system can't do what you want it to do as a user. It's just that maybe it hasn't been made clear to you, or it hasn't been implemented well for you.
Yeah. I mean, not a great implementation. I mean, Mark, to be honest, there are systems out there that do have some capable limitations around the reports analytics, but for the most part, if you vet it correctly, you're going to end up with a system that should do what you need.
All right. So I got a question.
Sure.
We're getting questions in the Q&A, but this is an appropriate time to ask this one, which is, the question was, does Salesforce play in the SPM space, or is it a feed, or how does that work?
It's a feed. So FSDC does not per se have a purpose-drilled ICM or SPM application. We've seen people try to make that happen, but it usually does not work well. What we would often see is a lot of clients will ask, hey, how well does this integrate with Salesforce.com? And the answer for most of the leading vendors, at least the ones that I put up on the screen, the 5, it does. It works great. And you can actually create a dashboard, a page on your Salesforce.com login, and you can actually see all your sales comp data as a payee or a manager. And that's awesome. And even to the degree, some of these applications can port your pipeline in, and as a payee, you can check which orders you want to forecast from a commission standpoint, and you can do a personal micro forecasting of the orders from SFDC and see what commissions you get. So it's the integration's there, but SFD does not provide a standalone application.
Okay, great. I'm going to let you dig into the details of the satisfaction by capability, and then we'll take a couple more questions that we've got.
All right, let's go from there. Okay, guys. So what I'm putting on the screen for you is, we took that survey data, and what we did is we ranked the vendors based on the satisfaction ratings that they got from their clients. Now, for this content, obviously we didn't have the biggest survey pool we could get, but we still thought, man, it's interesting. Let's put it on the screen. The other thing to keep in mind is we only look for implementations or clients with 100 payees or more. So now if you look at the 5 vendors, Veracent, Exactly, SAP, Oracle, and Optimize, and you look at the rows, Calc, Crediting, and Platform, all of them did pretty good, right? I mean, they all hit the numbers. Clients are more or less satisfied with them. Now, that I think plays back to how the vendors did on the cumulative score. When we go to the next screen, you see a pretty big drop off on consistency across the vendors. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind, right? So we did have a lower participation count. So I think, it's tough to say with, really a lot of conviction that, yeah, this is exactly how we'd expect it to map out if we expanded this to 1,000 participants or 1,000 survey takers. But, there are some things we can tease out of here. One, Veracent did well. They did pretty consistently across all the buckets. Exactly did really well on this slide. But the thing to keep in mind with Exactly is, when we looked at the population of people that took the survey, we actually had a higher population of smaller payee counts. Now there's still over 100 payees, but with Veracent, SAP, and Oracle, we saw thousands of payees, 1,000 payee or more survey takers versus exactly was more of them were smaller counts. So you could probably argue that a less sophisticated survey taker might be happier with forecasting, analytics, and reporting than somebody that was managing a comp program for 10,000 payees.
Mm-hmm.
SAP, the only thing I could offer here, guys, is that they had some pissed off clients or something, because I've got, I got nothing to say.
Low.
Yeah, I got nothing to say other than, it's a good application. It really is. It's got good capabilities. So I don't know what to say other than
they're trying
maybe
to communicate something.
Right.
They're sending a message.
It might have been the fact that, you had that conversion from Calida standalone to SAP, and you had a lot of back end work going over to the C/4HANA platform. So there might be some of the dissatisfaction around, the capabilities, and that kind of bled into the capabilities.
Yeah.
But anyways, I mean, that may be the two anecdotal data points I could offer. If we want to keep going, I think this is kind of an interesting screen, and this is a screen for the audience that I actually use when I'm sitting down with a client for the first time and we're talking about what SPM is and what it could potentially be. And where we start is that core capability. So I would put this on the screen. I'd say, guess what? The bottom item here box is what you should expect from any of these vendors out of the box. You should expect some level of ETL capability, right? Bringing transaction and reference data into the system. Oftentimes they have a in-house homegrown solution, or they marry with something like Informatica. Either way, these applications should be able to port your data in. They're going to have some capability on crediting your payees, so you don't have to do that yourself, but they'll actually build the crediting logic in the system. Handling just about any comp plan you can throw at it. The 5 vendors I put on the screen, the big 5 as we're calling them, they can handle 99% of the comp plans out there. You really shouldn't have to worry. And reporting analytics, there's going to be some baseline capability for reporting analytics, and then workflow, think plan approvals, disputes, rudimentary workflow. Again, this is out of the box. Now, as we think about differentiation, as we think about how these vendors differ, let's start looking at it from a user standpoint, like the different groups. Now, there's going to be some overlap between these as I populate them. But when we think about the admin or the folks that are responsible for designing the plans, they might be interested in benchmarks, modeling, integration of territory and quota for modeling and forecasting and planning exercises. Some of the more sophisticated organizations might have multiple opcos or international regions, and then they might want more advanced workflow, right? So more capabilities around the workflow that's already provided. So that might be a bucket, if you will, or a list of things the admin and design team might want. The next one is execs in finance. So again, we see forecasting and accruals be a big one for those guys as we talk to them. Artificial intelligence. So they might want more engagement for understanding the data and being predictive on what's going on with their sales comp program. Performance reporting relates back to, hey, are our plans actually driving the right behaviors? So Mark and Michelle, this is great stuff for you guys, right? Because your clients are like, hey, you gave us these plans. How do we tell if they're actually doing the right things, right? Are they gaming the plan? Are they looking for things? Anyway, that's performance reporting, advanced analytics, and then platform integration. The next bucket and the last one is payees and managers. So some overlap again, advanced analytics and reporting, mobile capabilities. So not just seeing what they'd see on their laptop condensed, but actually having mobile capabilities, be able to drill through and do different things. Pipeline modeling. So as I alluded to earlier, bringing in their pipeline from their CRM application, and actually seeing what kind of comp they'd get if they closed. Self-service reporting, so more interactive reporting so they can do more work on their own without bugging the admin team. And then the CRM integration, which kind of goes back to that pipeline modeling and just being able to, one click into the CRM and see all the data they want.
Okay.
So at first glance on this, Michelle, I don't know about you, but I and a lot of kind of tugging and pulling in different directions in an organization. So you know what the core capabilities are, but if you're trying to make a decision as a company, Rob, how do you balance all these priorities out? Or does it really go to whoever, holds the power in the organization?
Well, so usually when we sit down with a company to go through a vendor selection exercise, the first step is really defining, their requirements, right? What is the criteria they need to use to select the right vendor? And you can imagine that we focus very heavily on the bottom bucket, right? Because we want to make sure the core capabilities are going to meet their core needs. When we start to talk about their future state, we might have interviews and conversations with their executive team to talk about, okay, where are you taking the sales comp program? What do you need to see from this sales performance management investment to feel like you're getting what you want from it, right? So it might go back to, hey, we want to monitor the health of our compensation plans on a quarterly basis. Or I might want a global view into the health of my sales compensation performance, or what is the cost of my sales comp at a global view. Those kind of conversations are important and they're necessary. But when it comes down to actually putting your requirements together for the RFP and for the demo, you're going to have some prioritization, right? You're going to have some weightings, if you will. And so you might weight a lot of the stuff in this bottom bucket as a 3. Stuff on the top could be some 3, some 2, some a 1. It's a critical, nice to have, it's a wish list thing. But that's sort of the conversation you're going to want to have as you start to develop your selection criteria that's ultimately going to hopefully drive to a good vendor.
Well, I think this is a really great starting point, and a lot to consider. So, I think a big takeaway here are table stakes around core capabilities that you should expect really out of any of the vendors that you're talking to. And if they're lacking in any of those, 5 things that you're talking about, you're not comfortable, then maybe they're not the right fit for you. And then really take a look at the organization and understand that the needs are different. This is a great way of looking at it. I've not seen it expressed like that before, and I think that's really helpful for people. Now, I have a few more questions here. Ready to take a couple more? We've
Sure.
got, how important is an organization's data architecture in their, how you talked about this a little bit, in their SPM implementation experience? Are there steps that an organization can take regarding their data architecture up front to prepare for a future SPM implementation? It's kind of a big question, Rob.
Yeah, no, but it's a great one. It's a
Yeah,
great one. And I wish more people asked it,
yeah.
especially related to implementing at the enterprise level. Mid-size companies and very large companies, this has to be on the short list of to-dos before you start the project. And the reason I say that is, if you don't have a good understanding of how you're bringing data into your SPM solution, you need to get there, right? Because that is going to be usually the long pole in the tent, is your data integration strategy and how you're actually going to populate the system with the information you need for calculating comp and producing reports. So sometimes with very large organizations, we may do some sort of readiness assessment. And the readiness assessment comes in and challenges the company to say, actually, do you actually have the data ready to go, right? Or is it, coming in from 15 or 20 different disparate sets of folks, and some of it is subjective, some of it is objective, some of it's automated, some of it's written down on a napkin. I mean, you got to get that stuff dialed in, because if you jump into an implementation, you start gathering your requirements and designing things out, a lot of it's going to be based on how you've assumed the data is going to be ported in. Now, as I said earlier, all these applications have some capability of porting data, right? You can do manual uploads of Excel. You can do secure data integration with the cloud system that you choose. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to skin the cat, but you got to look at your data. You got to make sure it's clean, it's ready to go, and you know where you're going to be pulling it from before you start the project.
Yeah, that's extremely good advice. Garbage in, garbage out, right? Same with plan designs. Okay, I've got a question here, and this is really going to be pulling on your 20 years of experience in the space, because they're talking about being up for a renewal with their current vendor.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, what do you suggest that they would add or negotiate into a new product? Now, without knowing who they are, what they add, I'm not exactly sure, right?
Sure.
But they want to know, like, what do they do? How would they start with a negotiations process?
Yeah, that's a great one. I think, if you're happy with the vendor and things are going well and you feel like you're covered and you really don't want to get into a new application, I think it's an appropriate time to sit down and actually bring in um, uh, uh, an SE, a sales engineer, if you will, or a technical resource from the vendor to walk you through all their capabilities that they've been working on, right? None of these vendors are asleep. They're all working on the next greatest thing. And so it's not a bad thing to bring somebody in and have them kind of walk you through technically what are all the things that they've got on their roadmap and what they're putting out, and then figure out how does that integrate, because you got to be careful, right? Just because they bought an application doesn't mean it's integrated with their ICM product just yet. So that's one thing. The other thing I would offer is we probably work with 5 to 6 companies a year that are on a system, they're up for renewal, and they want to see if the grass is greener. They don't really want to bring the vendors in, but they definitely want to see, is the grass greener? Is this application we have today meeting our needs? Is it going to be able to grow with us? And sometimes we come out of those conversations, most of the time we come out of those conversations with, yes, the application you have is great. It's going to give you what you need. Here are the things to do to get you to where you want to be. However, sometimes we do come out of those conversations with, actually, you have requirements that are never going to fit, or at least as we understand the product today, not going to fit. And guess what? We implement these 5 other applications and 2 of them would actually meet your needs. And here's what you might expect if you were to go down that path. So it's not a bad time to at least have some conversations with other vendors, understand what their pricing structure is, and then use that to your, I guess, leverage to get, a better deal out of your current vendor, or push them to give you some of the things that you think you need. And Michelle, I know you know this, but we're going to put up some pricing here in a minute.
Yep.
And so for the folks that are coming up for renewal, hopefully this isn't super shocking and you're not paying a lot more than what you see on the screen.
I know. I feel like before I take any more questions, they fit in with a couple of the questions that are coming. So I think I'd like you to go ahead and move on to the next area of this, because we have some really good content that you still have to share.
Right. I think the next area that we talked about is really, what's the difference between SBM and enterprise? And for us, it's not so much determined on the size of the company, right? It's usually more akin to the number of payees and the complexity of their sales compensation program. So if it's wildly complex with, with 100 people getting credit for one transaction, and you've got, 10 different types of hierarchies, and you've got 7 different regions around the world that you got to, now we're talking enterprise. Now we're talking high complexity. The other thing that drives for me enterprise is massive volume, right? If you're running 10,000 transactions a month, that, any of these vendors can handle it out of the box, enterprise or SMB. If you are like some of our clients that are running 3 billion transactions a month, now you're going to get to a really short list of vendors who can actually meet that need. So what we've tried to do is create a slide that'll effectively share with you, I think, what we think are enterprise versus SMB. So enterprise applications for us, the folks that are more akin to, and you will see at the big banks, at the big insurance companies, big pharma, Oracle, SAP, Vericent, some of the folks that, you would see at the mid-market or commercial, Captivate, Performio, Exactly. Now, as I said, Exactly can fit at the enterprise if it's a, if the requirements aren't pushing Exactly's capabilities, and it could be a good fit. More specifically, the differentiators that I was talking about, if you have multiple hierarchies, if you have very complex crediting, if you have currency and language needs, not only for the payees, but for the administrators, and that is a call. High volume processing, complex data management needs, right? So if you've got, I was on a project one time, we had 70 different data feeds we had to bring into the solution, right? It required a massive amount of effort to get all that data cleaned up and at a point where you could port it in, and then managing multiple business lines and regions. So that kind of goes back to, that global view, right? So if you have 7 different groups all managing comp differently, do you need different instances? Do they all need to be on the same instance for reporting capabilities, but you need data and role-based security? All those things are going to lead to, are you an enterprise or are you covered by SMB? If you're covered by SMB, you've got 15 plus vendors out there you can look at. If you're an enterprise or you kind of fall into the enterprise bucket, yeah, that list gets a little shorter.
So Rob, on the crossover here, how often do you see situations where you're seeing crossover from one direction or the other, meaning an SMB type provider trying to simply sell too high into an organization that's got too many complex needs, or maybe the other direction, we want to put one of the big enterprise solutions in, but it's actually overkill for what we need for an SMB type of situation?
So I'll tackle the last one first. So any of these enterprise solutions can handle the SMB market very easily. And I've seen very aggressive pricing from these guys. So even if you are only 100 payees or 150 payees, any of these enterprise applications are going to be a good fit for you. It's not going to be overkill, and you're probably going to get a very good price. Now, the thing that throws people off, however, that are less sophisticated or smaller is when they go into these demos, and I'll pick on SAP, is it does look complex. You know, they've got a very robust application, so it can be a little overwhelming. Whereas if you go into a demo with Performing or Exactly, it's clean, it's nice, it seems very simplistic, and hey, I can navigate this no problem. The proof's in the pudding, though. It's in the details, because when you start pulling things back and you start looking, well, for this specific crediting scenario, when I have these 15 people getting credit off this transaction and I have to deal with these clawbacks and these, you know, rollovers and blah blah blah, that's when it's going to get interesting. That's when you start to find out, hey, which one of these vendors actually meets that the best. Or hey, I do a lot of dispute resolution, you know, and I need to have the ability to change things very easily in all these different areas. All that stuff sort of gets into it. I've actually forgot your first part of the question, Mark.
The first one was, which actually ties into a question we had, if a company may grow out of small,
Oh, yeah.
if they feel it doesn't meet their needs, like what is a good example of that, and how does that, you know, what do you see? What are the situations that might happen?
Yeah, you know, and I mean, I think sometimes what we see is when clients go from, hey, I just care about table stakes, you know, I just need to get transactions in, process, get a good report out. When it gets a little bit more interesting is when they start to mature and they start to say, well, I need an analytics dashboard that tells me if my plans are driving the right behavior, or I want to roll this spiff out, but I want the reporting to know if that spiff actually drove the results, right? Was there ROI on launching a spiff? Or, you know, another one is just when you start doing mergers and acquisitions and you start lumping in these other companies. Well, you're typically not going to put them on your exact plan day one. They're going to have to run on their own set of plans until you create a migration strategy to bring them onto your compensation plans, or get them under your fold, if you will. When you do that, and you start to bring in other nationalities or different companies that are sitting in different regions of the world, that it just explodes, you know, the requirements that you're going to be putting on the SPM platform. So if you start your path with one of these smaller applications, yeah, and you know that, you know, you might be going on an M&A kick in the next 5 years. Well, you know, you got to keep that in mind, right?
Yep. You know, with that, I think it's a good segue into some of this pricing. I think
Mm.
people are going to want to know what that looks like today.
Okay, let's see if we can have this. Hopefully we'll drive a question or two.
Yeah.
Okay, so before I put it on the screen, let me see if I can remember the disqualifiers or the qualifiers here. So we, right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we run a lot, not a lot, but we run anywhere from 15 to 20 vendor selections a year. And this is when companies ask us, hey, you know the space, you know these applications, will you come in and tell us what should we be looking at? You know, how do we evaluate these guys? And we'll just come in and we'll kind of help them along with that journey. Now, the results from those journeys are what you're going to see on the screen. I grabbed 4 different vendor selections and their pricing, and I want to qualify that the vendor in A, B, C, and D are not the same vendors each one, right? So the
Right.
prices are going to fluctuate, and it's not the same vendor coming in at the lowest price. And what we're going to start with is smaller accounts, 250 Cs to 750 payees. Now, pretty big delta between the highest and the lowest on this one, right? You know, 13 to 25, 38 to 66. You're going to see these vendors not be as aggressive, obviously, if they're selling lower payee counts. But, you know, on the 750, we did see something come in at the low teens. The other thing I want to point out that I forgot to is folks on the phone, this licensing is based on core capabilities, right? Comp, data, and reporting. We didn't include advanced analytics or quota territory stuff, anything that would be considered outside or an add-on sale. This was really just for the core product. Michelle,
Okay.
Mark, any questions on this, or should I get?
Yeah, no, you can keep going with
Okay.
what the pricing looks like. Yeah.
Okay. So this is where it gets they get a little bit more aggressive at the higher seat counts, right? So we have a 2,000 seat that, you know, they got down to $8, and they have a 5,000 seat they got down to 9. Again, I'm not saying that the same vendors are the same A, B, and C,
Right.
but you are seeing a more significant drop from what we saw at the 250 seat, more aggressive approach to things. Now, again, guys, this doesn't include the add-ons. It doesn't include
Yeah.
potentially an admin cost. Oh, you know what? I didn't even say it. I apologize. This is per seat per month.
Right.
So if you want to do the calculations for yourself and you're sitting at 2,000 seats, you know, my guidance would say, hey, take the middle one, $17 times the number of payees times the months. That's going to be your annual contract value.
Yep. I think this is really, really helpful. Very practical, Rob. We get asked this question all the time. The other question we get asked, so this is great. A great guide. I'm assuming you can allow people to have some of this information or direct them at the end of this. But this leads to the other question that they have, which is a crazy one, which is the whole deployment cost of that initial implementation. Talk to us a little bit about this one.
Yeah, so this is it's hard to set this slide up well,
Mm.
but you know what we've heard, or I guess what we even tell people this over the years is expect your implementation to be 1.5 to 2x on your annual contract value. So if you pay $100,000 for your licenses for 1 year, expect $150,000 to $200,000 implementation fee. Now, that's sort of the rule of thumb, or what you hear out of the vendors' mouths. What we've actually found is what you guys see on the right. It is not actually a strong correlation. You see everything that you can imagine, especially if you get a vendor in there that's super aggressive on the prices, but you have a really complex implementation. It's not going to be even close to the 2x. It might be 6 or 7x. So it really does depend on a number of things. And what I wanted to just maybe expand on here is the key drivers are usually the components, right? How many comp plans do you have? How many components in each one of those comp plans, and how complex they are? For reporting, it's often driven by, are you going with out of the box reports, or are you going to go with 17 tailored reports because you have to replace what your mainframe is delivering for you? And then data feeds. If there's an expectation that your implementation team is going to handle all your data migration, that obviously brings the cost up. If it's handled by the internal team and you're giving them a flat file that's clean and ready to go, totally different. Those are the, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, go ahead, Rob.
And the other piece of it is just work streams. So if you are going into a vendor if you're going into an implementation, testing is often one thing that gets overlooked. You know, if you're working directly with the vendors, they may not mention how much time you're going to have to put in to get the testing done. So if you bring in other work streams like testing or business process change management, or you get into a lot of advanced training, those are all things that kind of add to the cost.
So at first glance, Rob, at the pie chart, you see about half of the situations, 52%, are you're going to pay 100% or less than the license fee, and then 50% you're going to pay 100% or more. So it's kind of half and half. And you go, wow, that seems kind of random. But then, as you point out, with these variables, you have some level of control over what it's going to be. So it's not just that you're going to get charged more or less depending on the deal that you cut, but the more complexities you have, the more you're going to pay. And then the other variable is the better deal that you get on the licenses, the more you're probably going to pay as a percentage of licenses for implementation, just because it's going to be a higher multiple.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so one of the things that we try to advise clients on is, to the degree you can get ready for this implementation, such as consolidation of data feeds, even the harmonization of comp plans, are going to pay off dividends when it comes to not only the implementation but the ongoing management. Because if Mark, you know, a client comes to me and they've got 500 payees, but they've got 70 different comp plans and they're all wildly different. Oh my God, right? I mean, that's going to be significantly tough to implement for them and manage. And so my often my guidance is, look, is there anything we can do to harmonize these plans, right? Consolidate and repurpose some of the components across the plans. And I know you guys get this question on the design side of the house, but that's a big driver, you know, and having a team that does your implementation that will give you that feedback to say, I'm not sure this is a good use of money to try to implement these 7 plans for these 10 people. Why don't we think about, you know, putting them on phase 2, let you guys get their plans cleaned up and maybe make it a little less arduous when we want to put them in the system.
That gives us something to segue into. We have more questions that we're going to answer offline, everyone. So your questions will be answered. We will be just sharing them with Rob. But when we talk about the SPM journey, I think it is important to talk about, Rob, a good note to leave people with is, what are the things they need to do before they even enter that journey, or before a journey of implementation? So one of the things we talked about is, making sure that your plan designs are in good shape before you make the jump. But even before then, this whole assessment process, I mean, it really does make sense to get some help with your assessment, because the choices are vast, and it's kind of a very big landscape to navigate unless you really know. And having an approach that also helps you understand the different parts of the organization, the different users that need to be involved in the process up front, will help you from, avoid making some very costly mistakes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it sort
Yeah.
of plays into, define your future state. I mean, create a vision of where you want to land, because that's going to determine a lot of what you select from a technology standpoint. It's going to determine your roadmap, your implementation strategy, and it's going to keep you on the right track. Because when you bring these guys in, when you bring the vendors in, they got a lot of great stuff. They got some cool stuff, and it's easy to go,
Yeah.
shiny object, and get pulled off of some of the core items that you need to have to be successful.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, Rob. So
Thanks for having me.
everyone, we are happy. Rob is one of our partners as well. So we work with you on the SPM assessment and implementation. But we hope you enjoyed this as much as we enjoyed talking to Rob. And we are going to be sending you all some valuable information after this, and just kind of how you can navigate through your SPM journey. Thank you again, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. And we look forward to talking to you all on our next roundtable. So thanks again, Rob.
Yeah,
you,
no.
Rob.
And if anybody needs a copy of the actual detailed survey,
Yes.
absolutely reach out to Michelle or Mark, and I'll make sure we get a copy to you.
Thanks,
All
Rob.
right.
I would love
Thanks,
to
Rob.
send that out to
Thanks
everyone. Yep.
everybody for joining us. We'll see you on the next session.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy Friday. Bye-bye.
Thanks.